In 40k, humanity's power is, if not supreme in the galaxy, then damn near close to it. While yes, it is surrounded on all fronts by enemies, it only can't deal with them because it cannot bring its full might to bear on any single one of them. There is no single threat in 40k capable of eliminating the Imperium of Man. If you're a fan of them, this is because various things like industrial capability, population, and more keep humanity ahead of the curve. If you're not a fan of the Imperium, this is because it has plot armor thick enough to deflect tank shells. Feel free to decide which camp I belong in at your leisure. But in Halo, such is not the case. Despite hundreds of years of constant technological advancement in all fields, from medical to military, humanity is not the top dog in the galaxy. Incredibly important to it? Quite. But the #1 undisputed superpower? Not even close. To digress for a moment, Bungie has this weird obsession with the number 7, and having just hit 77,000 subs myself, I want to make this special little video where I once again force Halo knowledge down all of your throats. Am I comparing it to 40k with all the bias you can expect from someone who holds more positive feelings for Halo than he does most of his old friends from high school? Nope. Today is just a history lesson, a fun timeline of the major events of the Human Covenant War where humanity avoided extinction by the skin of its teeth. But first, Raid Shadow Legends, the sponsor of this video. Millions of people own it, millions of people play it. Let's talk about why you should be one of them. It is once again time for me to discuss elves. There will be no escape from it because Raid is once again focusing on the glorious pointy-eared bastards, and I am all too happy to oblige. Thousands of years ago, the High Elven civilization was born, and it was good. Lizardman Empire collapse? Psst, who cares? Not the elves, they kept on trucking. Rampaging orc hordes invading? Not a problem at all, just kill them and move on. It was Sirith, the Lord of Darkness, who finally was able to take them down a peg, creating the Dark Elves and causing a massive elven civil war. You might go, wow, Pancreas, they're so stupid they screwed themselves over. But that's the wrong way to look at it. They were so powerful, only other elves could take them down. And even that didn't work. The Dark Elves were exiled to go sit in the timeout corner for all eternity, and the High Elf Kingdom of Avari is the richest and most powerful in all of Teleria today. You cannot keep a High Elf down, they're simply too perfect for that to happen in every universe, Raid included. And sure enough, you can tell just how glorious they are from the champions shown here. From stalwart warriors to wizards throwing magic at whatever annoys them enough today to warrant being erased from existence, there's something for everyone amongst the High Elves. I'm a big fan of the Battle Sage and the Exemplar. The Battle Sage because there's nothing more elegant and elven than casting the mightiest of magics, and the Exemplar because hitting things with big sword makes my monkey brain happy. But I've more elven news for you because Raid just released a new faction, the Sylvan Watchers. Sylvan sounds a lot like elven, and with good reason. They've got forest elves, ents, druids, and fae in their roster. Wood elves and their allies in fantasy settings are yet another one of my favorite races. There's something special about watching a tree come to life and beat the snot out of whatever is pissing it off today while an elf fills the enemy with arrows the whole time. And now you can finally summon and wield these fearsome warriors in Raid Shadow Legends. Raid's also got a full lineup of events, along with the new season of the Forge Pass, where you can get your hands on some of the most powerful gear the game has ever seen. If the prospect of more elves isn't enough to get you into Raid, first of all, that drives me to the very cusp of rage. But here's something else to sweeten the deal for you, just in case. Using my link that's conveniently located in both the description and pinned comment of this video, or with a QR code staring you in the face at this very moment, you get $30 worth of bonuses for free. Rector Drath, the Epic Champion, 200,000 silver, 1 energy refill to keep you in the game, 1 XP boost, and an ancient shard to get yet another champion with. All this treasure will wait for you here in the inbox, right there in the corner, can't miss it. Rewards are only available for the next 30 days and for new players only, so if you haven't gotten a Raid yet, then now's the perfect time to do so. Download Raid Shadow Legends now, and I'll see you in the game. Now, back to Halo time. For a brief introduction to both of the major players involved, the Covenant is an alliance of alien races banded together by a common religion. A belief that an ancient species known as the Forerunners ascended to godhood through their technology and left it behind to be found by the Covenant, so its races too could join them in divinity. I've already made a video about them to some extent, so go watch that for a little bit more information on them. Or don't. I'm not a cop. Humanity in Halo, meanwhile, did all the usual science fiction trappings. Technology exploded and space travel became relatively commonplace after a few short 100 years. All sorts of cultures and ideologies expanded across the stars, sometimes leading to conflict and sometimes leading to more conflict. By 2525, the beginning year of the Human Covenant War, humanity numbered a little over 800 colonies, with about 210 of them being known as the Inner Colonies. These were the most well-developed and populated human planets, being the first ones colonized. You can probably guess that the other planets and moons were known as the Outer Colonies from this information, but if you couldn't, there's a little bit of Halo lore on the house for you. All of this was kept together by the United Nations Space Command, or UNSC as it shall henceforth be known, in order to save myself all those unnecessary syllables. First contact between humanity and the Covenant wasn't even official. Some jackal pirates just raided some poor merchant ship. At first, the Office of Naval Intelligence, or ONI, the sneaky bastards of the UNSC whose rap sheet includes such lovely things as every war crime known to man and kidnapping children to create child super soldiers with, didn't even think it was aliens. At first, they just thought it was insurrectionist activity. They laid a trap and surprise! It's not just pirates, it's alien pirates. This led to a bit of a skirmish, and Avery Johnson was there for this whole time. A little fun fact for those who wondered what he was up to before the Halo games. Eventually, however, however, official contact was attempted. It was really goddamn funny because the humans tried to show that they were a peaceful species and just generally attempted to make the best first impression. So they laid out this buffet of fruits and veggies to be all like, we are peaceful, we respect all life, please be our friends. And then the race that greeted them was most commonly known as the Brutes. Should've laid out the bacon, humanity. The delegation went bad when a grunt got a bit trigger-happy and opened fire on a human soldier, and the Covenant force retreated. And then pretty rapidly, things get real bad if you're a human being. Largely unrelated to all of this, 3 of the ruling race of the Covenant, known as prophets because I'm not saying whatever word this is, approached a foreigner AI asking it to begin a new age for the Covenant. The Covenant was all about marking periods like this, you see. Very 40k with the names, too. Instead of telling them to go nuts with this new era of prosperity or whatever, though, the AI told them that they're all a bunch of morons. The whole reason the Covenant bothered sending a delegation to humanity, you see, was to recover foreigner artifacts they detected. Or at least that was the biggest reason, maybe not the whole reason. Before going to harvest, they read the fancy space runes they had, and it came back as reclamation, or reclaim, as in go reclaim all of our lost god tech, you goobers. The problem was, as the AI shortly told them, reclaim was actually reclaimer. The Covenant thought that the humans were just hoarding a metric ass ton of foreigner artifacts. Turns out that humanity was the forerunner artifacts. This revelation that humanity was their true successors and not the Covenant would have shattered their religion, and more to the point, their empire. Being in charge of the Covenant, the prophets were very much a fan of not letting this happen. So they hushed that up, and in order to make sure no one found out, decided to erase humanity from existence. Good plan, prophets. Now, in the interest of not making this video either 3 hours long or a 15-part series, I'm gonna sum up how it went for the most part and not read through every single battle I can find in the wiki or pull from the depths of my memory. I'll give some highlights though, because by god are some of these moments in the Human Covenant War the coolest shit you've ever heard of. Harvest, the planet all this went down on and where first contact was officially made, was the first battleground of the Human Covenant War, and it initially went about as well as you'd expect for the UNSC. Despite managing to evacuate most of the civilians, the Covenant began glassing its surface with their warships. Fighting on Harvest actually managed to go on for roughly 5 years, with the brutal back-and-forth war taking place. Halo Wars says it best.
At first it was going well, then setback after setback.
Despite the UNSC setting their finest, the Covenant would never be pushed back for long, and their vastly superior technology ensured that any engagement would be costly for the UNSC even if victory was achieved. Turns out, energy shields are pretty good at deflecting 5.56 rounds, who would have thought? For a brief sidetrack, let's talk about the Spartans, aka the only thing you know about Halo if you've never played the games or read the books. Or I guess watched the TV show, but I prefer to pretend that never happened. The Spartans were super soldiers created by Oni to wage war against the insurrectionist movement. The UNSC was getting Vietnamed in space a lot of the time, and you can only nuke so many cities to get rid of the enemies in them before public opinion takes a bit too sharp of a nosedive. The most well-known and powerful of the Spartans, including the Master Chief, were Spartan 2s. The Spartan 1s were largely just augmented marines, not the demigods of war that the 2s were. As it would turn out though, they were just as good at killing aliens as they were at killing random insurrectionists, and quickly changed their priorities from killing random terrorists to kill anything that isn't a human being. Indeed, so fearsome were they that the Covenant began to refer to them as demons. No, not demons with an A, you Warhammer Goblin. They were even deployed to Harvest, though their initial engagements were just as dangerous for them as it was for the average UNSC Marine. They were just better equipped to deal with it. The Spartan 2 Samuel was lost in their first battle against the Covenant, though the mission was ultimately a success as a result of his sacrifice. He was 14 at the time, just in case you forgot that they're just child soldiers. Meanwhile, for the space battle portion of this sci-fi series, Vice Admiral Preston J. Cole was busy giving the Covenant the runaground across the outer colonies and near Harvest. He was in charge of the then largest human space fleet ever assembled, and his efforts actually were what led to the UNSC retaking Harvest for the first time in 2526. His brilliance was such that despite the odds stacked against him, he regularly achieved success in his battles. Even with the Spartans' deployment to Harvest, however, and the continued efforts of the Navy and other armed forces, Harvest was eventually taken. If you watched the Covenant and Warhammer video, you know that I was a big fan of jerking off the Covenant's tech, and that is still most certainly the case right now. Human tacticians were frequently able to outwit the Covenant, but to make a comparison, Napoleon could probably outwit a couple hundred US Marines if he had an army of 10,000. He'd still be bleeding from the fight and wouldn't be able to stand against the full US military. Likewise, every victory against the Covenant required the UNSC's best and brightest, as well as an overwhelming numerical advantage. The ratio of UNSC to Covenant spacecraft needed to achieve victory in an even fight was 3-to-1 at best, for instance, and the Covenant wasn't so stupid as to allow these odds to happen if they could help it. Their tech was just too far beyond humanity's, and it wasn't long before mankind was forced into the losing side of a long war of attrition. Admiral Cole's great victory that allowed them to reclaim Harvest, with him taking the helm of the largest fleet in history of 40 warships, that was against one Covenant ship. and he lost 13. True, he did gain insight on how to deal with Covenant naval assets, but I wouldn't call that a resounding victory by any stretch of the imagination. Something I've seen a few times is how people mention that the UNSC was able to win most of the ground battles they fought but couldn't win in space. And since the Covenant only cared about glassing the planet and leaving, this meant that even winning a complete victory on the ground was useless. That's an understandable point of view to have. I mean, every time you play a Halo game, you see the Master Chief or Noble Six or some other really cool dude clowning on the Covenant at every turn. But unfortunately for the UNSC, this viewpoint is incorrect. It was a bit more even during ground engagements, but not by much. In all fields, UNSC was only able to win isolated engagements, usually losing the larger battle in spite of isolated success. And as stated earlier, the ground victories were ultimately meaningless. The Covenant would check a planet for foreigner relics, and then if they didn't find any, they just torched the thing. And since there were only so many planets with foreigner relics on them to force a ground battle, a lot of the times if the Covenant lost the ground battle, they just shrug and nuke the planet from orbit. For the 27 years this war lasted until 2552, the Covenant would slowly grind humanity down to almost nothing using this method. It wasn't completely peachy for the Covenant, however. There was some internal strife between the important races that we'll get to later, and during the Harvest campaign they realized that despite the Covenant's massive advantage in all fields, it's a bit of a costly matter of eliminating an entire spacefaring species. Ensuring complete eradication would leave Covenant space lacking in defenses, and they had to find an alternative method of bolstering their fleet. If you've played Halo Wars, you already know what that method is. The Covenant attempted to reactivate an armada of foreigner warships they had found on a shield world. Though thanks to the UNSC Spirit of Fire's crew digging them down at every opportunity, the armada was instead destroyed. Surprisingly, when you detonate an FTL engine that rips holes into another dimension in the heart of a star, things get very hot very quickly for that solar system. During this campaign, there was also an appearance by a very important player that I will sure as hell get to, but the knowledge of that little eldritch horror never got out to the galaxy at large. Not yet, anyways. And humanity was able to achieve some pretty decisive victories on occasion, including a very fun one regarding now full Admiral Preston J. Cole. At one point, he was victorious in a massive naval engagement against the Covenant. 300 UNSC ships to 162 Covenant ships. Nice job, Cole. He even managed to get some help from an insurrectionist fleet, because when the aliens just want to kill every human, you forget past grudges pretty damn quickly. And then another Covenant fleet warped in. This was a fight that he just couldn't win. Not with his fleet, at least. So he had an idea. Mock the Covenant as hard as he could. This might sound like nothing but bluster, and fair is fair, it was, but there's something you gotta know about the elite race. They are absolutely obsessed with honor. It's not always stupid honor like in 40k, where they forego things like ranged weaponry in order to charge a Tau gun line because Khorne demands it or some stupid shit. They'll be sneaky and lay traps and do whatever they need to do to win. All's fair in love and war, after all. But when you call their entire religion false, which again it was, but they don't know that yet, and scream that humanity are the ones that should be taking the foreigner's mantle, they get a bit angry. And when Cole openly invited them to prove him wrong, well, the entire fleet decided to take him up on this challenge. Cole wasn't done flexing yet, though, not by a long shot. He plunged his cruiser into a nearby brown dwarf and fired every single nuclear missile he had at its core. 100 nuclear weapons was all that fake star needed to turn into a real star, and the Covenant fleet there was wiped to a man as it went hot. Cole also lived through this, by the way, just in case you thought he was done proving he had the biggest dick in the galaxy. A slip space travel signature was detected inside the brown dwarf just before it got hot, and some AIs calculated his survival rate at just under 90%. And rumors of human guerrilla fighters that were oddly successful at waging war against the Covenant persisted for years to come in the area. But as far as people can confirm, his story ends here, and you know what? I think he's got one of the few happy endings in the entire Halo universe. It's canon he might have settled down on a farming planet with his lover, and you know what? I hope he did. Of course, the last few minutes have been a bit too positive for humanity, so let's switch track back to misery. Despite all of these massive successes, the Covenant was too much for humanity to face. Every victory is balanced out by a dozen defeats. The outer colonies were slowly but surely destroyed, and by 2535, 10 years after the outbreak of war, all of them had either been confirmed destroyed by the Covenant or contact had been lost. Various measures were enacted to sustain humanity's survival. The Cole Protocol, there's our boy at it again, dictated that human ships either had to make random slip space jumps when retreating in order to not have the destinations of human worlds tracked, or to wipe all navigational data and self-destruct in order to assure that if they were boarded, the Covenant couldn't take the data by force. Additionally, when a Spartan II was killed, they were listed as MIA to avoid a massive drop in morale as humanity realized that the legendary heroes of the war could in fact die. The war was even kept a secret for the first few months of the conflict, though this didn't last very long. All of this wasn't enough, however, and soon enough the inner colonies, where humanity's most developed infrastructure was, came under attack. The following pattern would then continue for most of the rest of the war. Humanity would hold the planet for a time, lose it as the Covenant forces engaged en masse, humanity would retreat, rinse and repeat. The Spartan III program was eventually conceived to make less effective but greater quantities of Spartans. They didn't even bother kidnapping kids with good genes like the Spartan IIs, they just grabbed orphans off the street and pumped them full of chemicals and augmentations. ones. These units saw success, but their losses were even greater than the 2s, with one engagement resulting in the deaths of 298 of the 300 Spartan 3s deployed. The worst came in 2552, the last year of the war. By this point, not only had humanity been fighting a losing war long enough for an entire generation of people to be born who knew nothing but defeat against an alien race who wanted them dead, but the UNSC had lost the majority of its military, and humanity the majority of its planets and people. A plan to find the Covenant homeworld and capture a prophet was hatched as a last gambit to prevent humanity's extinction. This was the final Hail Mary of humanity. Oni estimated that if this mission didn't succeed, humanity likely only had months left to live. The plan would begin on the planet of Reach, humanity's most well-defended planet behind only Earth and the most important for the war effort period. Everything from engineering to training to manufacturing to whatever spec ops shit you can think of took place on Reach. This plan was never achieved though, when in July of 2552, the Covenant finally found Reach. There was a whole load of foreigner artifacts on the planet, and the Covenant had found it via the luminaries that find such things. Side note, but that's also how they found human population centers a lot of the time without there being foreigner artifacts present. Remember that whole reclamation translation? Turns out, being the successors to gods has some downsides. Oni also knew that this would likely happen, but helpfully did not share this hunch with the UNSC in order to keep them in the dark about the foreigner artifacts. Oni also, if you haven't noticed, cannot do anything that isn't morally gray at best. They wouldn't sell you ice cream without lacing it with its cyanide and then putting a tracking chip in the cone. At least some Inquisitors are nice people. I don't think there's a proper Oni agent who isn't a shitbag. Reach was surrounded by orbital platforms capable of shooting tungsten rods at a pretty goddamn appreciable fraction of the speed of light. Pretty much the only thing capable of hurting Covenant ships on its own that wasn't a one-time use sort of thing. By the time the battle was underway, 60% of the entire remaining UNSC fleet was redeployed from other areas to protect the planet, and Spartans practically littered the place, including none other than the Master Chief and one Noble 6, equally deadly as Chief despite only being a Spartan 3. With all their might arrayed, how did the defense of Reach go for the UNSC? Well, even if you haven't played Halo Reach, you can probably guess, but here's a quote from UNSC Colonel James Ackerson about whether or not it was worth sending a ship to see the aftermath.
We are not wasting a single UNSC ship to confirm what we have already seen a dozen times before. Reach is gone. Everything on it is blasted to bits, burned, glassed over, and vaporized. Everyone on Reach is dead. Dead, dead, dead.
Thanks to the Remembrancer for that fantastic reading. I give him a cringe orc voice, he gives me an Oscar performance. You might have noticed that this video isn't as funny as my usual stuff, or at least that I haven't written in as many things that I think pass for jokes as usual. That's because for all the funny bits in Halo games, all the times where Sergeant Johnson talks about how he had to share his military-assigned rock with his platoon, Halo lore is just kind of depressing. Grimdark even, much like Warhammer. Oh sure, the games are all about you kicking ass, but the larger picture is, wow, it sure does suck to be a human in this universe, or really anyone in this universe at one point or another. But there's my little disclaimer for why this video might not be that funny. Back to lore. The fall of Reach took just over a month, likely longer than any planet before it aside from Harvest. It wasn't long before the Covenant found Earth as well. But I skip ahead a little bit. Because of the efforts of Spartan Team Noble, the UNSC ship Pillar of Autumn was able to escape Reach with several prominent figures aboard. Most noteworthy is of course John 117, the Master Chief, as well as the smart AI Cortana. Cortana is the most important one to talk about at first. In what was technically a violation of the Cole Protocol, Cortana had, instead of just jumping randomly somewhere within slipspace range, took them to coordinates deciphered from a foreigner artifact. At these coordinates, and with the Covenant fleet hot under their tails, they found the titular Halo, a foreigner-built ring world whose purpose was as yet unknown. The Covenant believed it would allow them to ascend to godhood as the foreigners once did. The UNSC and Master Chief crash-landed on the ring as the Pillar of Autumn had been taking heavy damage, and waged guerrilla warfare against the Covenant to great success. Of course, if you played Halo, you know how this turns out. The Covenant find a locked facility with the words "Don't Dead Open" inside written on it, but unfortunately, the team in charge of this little expedition couldn't read and opened it anyways. They figured it was a cache of foreigner weapons or something like that. It wasn't. It was the Flood. For those of you who aren't familiar with Halo, you might be wondering why busting a foreigner water pipeline matters that much in the grand scheme of things. For those of you who do know Halo, you understand just how horrific this was, but I'll explain anyways. The Flood in 40k video will come eventually, but for now let's just leave their description to the basics. The Flood are a race of parasitic beings that can infect almost any living creature and turn it to their side. If they can't infect something because it lacks a central nervous system, they'll just eat it and absorb its biomass into their own. And to top it off, they're hyper-intelligent to the point of being able to corrupt computers despite being entirely biological. There's so much more to them than that, but for now that's the basics of what you need. They're infectious to the point that, as the elite Ridus Vadam puts it in Halo 3,
one single flood spore can destroy a species.
The Covenant team was devoured almost entirely, with only a few survivors being present by the time the Chief showed up to offer any resistance. After the Covenant opened it, but before the Chief got there, some UNSC soldiers, including Captain Keyes, who was in charge of this whole clusterfuck, went in to check it out. Can you guess what happened to them? If you said they got eaten, then congratulations, you win this horrible quiz. All except for this one guy who never gets PTSD because he doesn't get to the post part of post-traumatic stress disorder. Now the war across Halo descended into a three-way brawl as the remaining UNSC forces had to contend with an alien alliance on one side and the zombie apocalypse on the other. The Forerunner Monitor AI-343 Guilty Spark contacted Master Chief and told him to activate Halo to defeat the Flood. He conveniently left out how this would eradicate all life in the galaxy, but Cortana thankfully kept the Chief from pulling the trigger on the gun pointed at the head of the universe. Guilty Spark took offense to this, and now it's a four-way war with the Sentinels of the Halo Ring joining the fray, because why not make this even more messy? Messy indeed though it was, Master Chief overloads the Pillar of Autumn's split-space core, Halo explodes, and the day is saved. Except no it isn't, because after he's rescued, the Covenant find Earth. Fuck. Thankfully, the Covenant fleet that finds Earth is a small one, which Admiral Hood, the guy left in charge of the UNSC Navy by this point, even notes as being odd. But that's not gonna last very long once the Covenant realize they found humanity's homeworld, so there's no time to ponder this little mystery quite yet. After Master Chief dicks around on Earth killing aliens for a while, he and the daughter of the now-dead Captain Keyes hitch a ride into Covenant's split-space portal to another Halo. Yeah, there's 7 of them, it turns out. Sucks to suck, humanity. They land on it and get ready to see if they can't blow this one up again when things get even worse than ever. This is during the Halo games, remember, so it only makes sense that now the problems are just compiling one after another. How is it worse? Well, the Flood have already broken out on this planet and formed a Gravemind. Imagine a hentai monster the size of Godzilla, and he's as smart as 1,000,000 Stephen Hawkings. That's a Gravemind, the guiding intelligence behind the Flood after they absorb enough biomass. Master Chief did manage to kill the Prophet of Regret before things really went south, who was actually one of the 3 prophets that founded his whole religion was a lie, but unfortunately Covenant space superiority was still a thing, so they just tried to glass the structure he was on with him inside of it. The Gravemind saved him, as well as the Arbiter, however, the Arbiter being an elite disgrace for allowing the first Halo to go kablooey. He and the Chief went their separate ways to stop the Covenant from firing the ring, and it's at this point I need to explain why an elite and a human are working on the same team, because we aren't at Halo 3 yet, where it's just a given. During the Human-Covenant War, for a while the elites followed the orders of the prophets without question. Humans are bad, kill all humans. Done deal. Eventually, however, their more martial and honorable sides started to win out. They felt humanity was worthy of being offered admission to the Covenant. If they could put up this good of a fight despite all the odds being stacked against them, why shouldn't they be allowed into the Special Alien Club? Additionally, the brutes, much less fans of things like critical thinking, were being seen as more and more of a replacement for the elites. Throughout the course of Halo 2, you can see this taking place as the brutes replace the elite as the head guards of the prophets. This comes to a head when the Arbiter is betrayed while he looks for the activation key to this new Halo, and the elites as a whole are ordered for destruction alongside humanity. Thankfully for everyone involved, but the Covenant I guess, the Arbiter is successful in preventing Halo from firing, with some help from Sergeant Johnson and Miranda Keyes. Chief infiltrates the mobile Covenant capital of High Charity, but the Flood have found a way in and rapidly infect the entire goddamn thing. Only the Prophet of Truth escapes, the final leader of the Covenant and the last surviving of 3 prophets who knew the truth behind this whole shit show. The second Prophet of Mercy was on High Charity too with them, but yeah, he got eated by the Flood. I like how Truth is such a shit show in this cutscene that a race called Brutes is showing more compassion than he is. Master Chief escapes High Charity by hitching a ride on the Foreigner Dreadnought that was powering the place, and the final arc of the war begins. Yeah, he had to leave Cortana behind, but, you know, you gotta do what you gotta do. By now, humanity and the elites formed an uneasy alliance, since the elites have been forcibly made to see the truth of their religion, and humanity's taken whatever it can get by this point. Chief makes it back to the Earth, where things have not been great. Even though Earth's defenses were even better than Reach's, it's still well on the way to falling despite the UNSC's best efforts. Thankfully, the Covenant decided that right at the cusp of victory is the perfect time for a little civil war, so that's eased up the stress a bit. Master Chief, the Arbiter, and whatever tattered remains of humanity's armed forces are left fight the Covenant on Earth before the reason the Prophet of Regret pretty much tripped over Earth is revealed. He found a Foreigner portal that would take them to the Ark, an extragalactic installation that I've talked about in my Foreigner video, but to sum it up, you can fire all the Halos at once from there to kill everything, and it can make even more Halos. I don't know where it gets the materials to do so, being in intergalactic space and all, but maybe the Foreigners put a few more of those devices that can just casually tunnel into other universes to get the scrap needed for it. Portal to the Ark opens, the Flood are now unearthed because the elites weren't able to contain High Charity, and half of Africa gets glassed off the face of the Earth. Better than being devoured whole by the Flood, I guess? Everyone rushes to the Ark at once, the Covenant to finally reach godhood, the humans and elites to not all die, and the Flood to also not die and maybe eat everyone afterwards if there's time. Every side is making one final effort to win the war once and for all. Not really important, but we also get this banger of a line by Ridus Vadam, the elite in charge of their fleet.
Shipmaster, they outnumber us 3-1.
Then it is an even fight.
God, that's so fucking cool. The humans, the elites, and the Flood very briefly ally to stop the Covenant, and when they do, the Flood predictably betray everyone. The Ark is destroyed as the Master Chief, Arbiter, Cortana, and Sergeant Johnson fire the replacement Halo for the one from Comet Evolve before it's ready. The Gravemind and all Flood present are destroyed, the Covenant falls to pieces due to everything that occurred, and humanity has almost been completely wiped out in a war that killed billions on both sides. But with that, the Human-Covenant War has finally come to an end. except for the special ops teams of Spartans that lost contact with the rest of the UNSC and decided to go through with a plan to destroy an elite colony with billions on it. Since they were on their own with no way to talk to anyone, they didn't realize the war was over and a truce was formed between the elites and humanity. Nothing like when you lose cell reception, commit the war crime to end all war crimes. Am I right, fellas? But yeah, there was my 77k sub special. I always like talking about Halo lore, and I do hope you not only gave this video a chance, but if you stuck around to the end, thank you. I sincerely mean it. It's always nice to branch out, and if this does well, this shows me that that's actually got some merit to it, you know? As always, thank you to my wonderful channel members. You are the Mjolnir armor to my Spartan 2, keeping me powered, safe, and ready to go at a moment's notice. If you'd like to support the channel, feel free to subscribe or become a member. Either way, thank you for watching, and take care out there. Unrelated to anything, but Halo really does have some of the best ship names in any science fiction setting. I mean, come on. The Covenant hits us up with the Solemn Penance, the Long Night of Solace, and the mother of them all, the Shadow of Intent. Meanwhile, the UNSC has things like the Pillar of Autumn, In Amber Clad, and my personal favorite, the UNSC Say My Name. Did you know that the Say My Name was a part of Operation Bum Rush? I'm not making any of this up. This is the plot of Halo ODST. It was a Marathon-class cruiser too. That's one of the UNSC's capital ships. There's decent odds a Covenant ship was wiped off the face of the galaxy by the Say My Name. God, I love Halo.